Oh. Should have done my hair. What's up, Paul? What's up, Max?
What's up, gang?
How we doing? How we doing?
Dude, my left leg is itchy, and I don't know why. It's just my left leg. I don't have like a bug bite. I'm thinking it's allergies, but it's very frustrating. Like, because if it was like all over, it'd be like one thing, right? But it's just my left leg, and I'm like, what are we doing here, man?
I feel.
You there, Max? All right. You want to make the speech drop while we wait, Will?
I'm on it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, there goes my little wiener dog barking. That'll be fun. It's gonna be a solid stream. Gonna make sure that stays muted.
So just heads up, Paul, you might experience me breaking into your house and kidnapping your wiener dog.
Oh yeah, like wiener dogs? Is that a thing?
Yeah. I think they're adorable.
I'm a big fan. Yeah. They bark a lot, but they're really fun.
Yes,
got like neat dog personalities.
Yeah, and I love the little stubby legs. It adds character.
Yeah, well, yeah, like little, especially the back legs, really little. It's nice. It's pretty nice. 1:30. Interesting. Okay. Max, you there yet? Dope. Okay. You gonna be going to NFA now that Parley's done for the season, or they just dropped?
Yeah. Oh, and the answer is yes.
That's cool. It's your senior year, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, gotta get it in. Hey, Max, how's it going? Can you hear us now?
Hello? Yeah. Are we good?
I think we are good.
Okay, I've been like I don't know why, but like I joined and like on my screen it showed me that like I was joined in the round, everything. And then I was like talking and you guys were just like not hearing me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God. Okay. There we go. We're good though. We're good.
It says your internet is either poor or non-optimal right now. So I don't know if it helps you to have your camera off or anything. I know that, Will, you've had some like connection issues throughout the year and whatnot. So whatever makes you all most comfortable, whatever makes me able to hear you is what I'm into. But yeah, does anyone have any questions, or do you want to just
I have two.
Sure.
I think my first question is like, I know you have an updated paradigm, but how has that changed your views on disclosure, if at all?
I think disclosure is really good.
Okay, that makes sense. And then I think my next question is, I know you have a
sorry, to be clear, obviously, in Parley, whatever, but like in LD, I think it's good.
Yeah, and Parley is just not verifiable.
Yeah, that's right.
And then my next question is, I know you have a different threshold for speed in LD. What does that like kind of like look like? Is it like for going like say slower for tags and like fast?
Yeah. So if it's in your doc, I literally could not care less as long as it's clear to me that you're not just skipping words and clipping and all that kind of stuff. Like, I literally could not care less. You have given me a transcript of the speech. If you start to do analytics, please flag me and be like, Paul, start flowing, and be like, Paul, this is analytics, and I will pick up on that. I'm usually pretty good at that, but if the round gets really fast, it's sometimes hard to know whether you're doing analytics or not, and I want to make sure. Josh was in front of me yesterday and read like 22 analytics, and I got all of them, so it should be fine if you flag them. But yeah, if it's in the doc, I do not care at all. If it's in the doc, you can just read as fast as you want.
Gotcha. And then just to clarify, because I know some judges have told me that, but they still prefer me to go slower on the tags. Would you also like prefer that?
Let me put it this way. I do not flow anything that is not analytics and LD.
Oh, okay.
I literally don't flow a single word. And so I'm going to go with, and I will note when you cut stuff and whatnot. I've done that for 7 years and it's never been a problem. So
cool.
I prefer LD because, I have carpal tunnel, so I don't want to flow when I don't have to. But yeah, if you just tell me when I have to flow, I will flow. Otherwise, I will follow along in the doc. Thank you for giving me a transcript of your speech.
Yes, I like that. That is, you just see, I'm a kid in a candy store now. Thank you, Paul.
All right, have fun. Do you have any questions, Max? I don't think we've ever met.
Yeah, no, we haven't. I read your paradigm.
Real quick, this is what I look like, just for the record. case you ever need to remember that. You remember that one,
Okay.
yeah?
Sheesh, look at that fresh haircut.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, it is super fresh. Yeah, go ahead.
So I read your paradigm, and I know you had a lot to say about critical affirmatives in NPDA.
Mhm.
Can you explain like how that philosophy transfers over to LD?
Yeah, so I think there is a topic. I think the topic matters. I think if the negative doesn't say anything about it, you don't lose the debate. But I think if the negative does say something about it and wins that debate, that they will probably win the debate, right? So, if you read a non-topical app and they just read a K or whatever, rather than reading T or framework or whatever, then you'll probably be fine. But if they read like a compelling long-form shell, I find it hard to imagine a world where I don't end up evaluating that most likely in their favor, absent you kind of just decking them on like a thesis or line-by-line level.
All right, I guess we'll give that a spin then. Yeah, so that's all the questions I had. I'll upload my case in the speech.
Cool.
And
Also, please time each other because this is open and you're adults.
Nah, Paul, I need you to time me. I also need you to burp me.
Yeah, I got you, dude. I got you.
Phillips, it's going to say around 1, but I think this should still be the correct document. Let me check.
For sure, no problem. That's an interp. Just kidding.
All right, I think this is correct. I just made some small changes, so it should. Yeah, okay, we're good. All right, then pull up some time, and then we'll get started. All right. Observation 1 is the harms. First, market citizenship dominates U.S. discourse around immigration, fundamentally shapes our approaches to immigration. Monaco 2020. Historically, immigration policies have been shaped by social beliefs about who deserves to be officially included in society. Undocumented immigrants are portrayed as criminals by natives, right-wing groups, and politicians. Some immigrants' rights groups and supporters counter that narrative by highlighting the stories of academically exceptional undocumented students. This advocacy, which focuses on the more deserving, captures the influence of market citizenship, defining who has the right to be in U.S. society. Market citizenship is the idea that citizenship should be conferred on people because of their economic output, which leads to the formulation of exclusionary definitions of membership. Immigrant labor has long held a central place in the American imaginary citizenship. Citizenship claims framed around the idea of undocumented people being hardworking, possessing deserving qualities like family and American values. And immigrants and refugees are treated as commodities now in 2012. When refugees are brought into the U.S., the primary purpose of the resettlement program is to get them employed as quickly as possible. Every other possible need, the most critical medical problems, is secondary to earning a living. People with legal citizenship are denied basic state assistance, even in the most catastrophic of situations. Next, immigrants are denied basic institutional rights, are subject to target campaigns of violence. Proving 2013. Federal enforcement priorities at the border pay little heed to basic rights or dignities. Agents continue to use deadly force despite the recommendation to end these practices. Government Commission review. The court have not proven effective in protecting the rights of migrants and constitutionally guaranteed due process. The coast caught and are held in detention. Some will not be charged because the court cannot handle the case, so they face a lengthy prison term, which gives them a criminal record, which in turn helps to justify stronger enforcement measures against dangerous criminals. Federal agents state workplace raids against immigrants. 129 enforcement teams operate across the country, often conducting house raids. Researchers have found a decided tendency of these teams to ignore constitutional requirements against breaking into homes without legal authority, searching without a warrant, seizing innocent people, and racially profiling. And immigrants are arrested, commodified, and dehumanized. Hernandez 17. Immigration prisons convert migrants into commodities that are capitalized and quantified. Once inside the prison, migrants work for 13 cents an hour. Policymakers use incarceration to methodically exploit oppressed racial groups. Immigrant detainee labor is a continuation of the American practice exploiting labor through incarceration. This new exploitation paradigm is possible only because the immigrant in the United States occupies the most marginalized of identity that have perceived criminals, non-citizens, and persons of color. Further, dehumanization results in systemic violence against immigrant populations. Ahmed's 19. Both anecdotal evidence and large-scale academic studies suggest a causal relationship between dehumanizing and violent attacks on migrants. The dehumanizing anti-immigrant language predicts violent crimes against refugees. The intertwining of dehumanization of migrants and violence against them. Given the absence of immigrants' guaranteed human rights, lies about immigrants are told and persist. The dehumanization of migrants is seeped into everyday language, animated mainstream political rhetoric, shaped politics, and accompanied violence. Commodification and systemic violence must be prioritized as a form of slow violence that disproportionately affects certain populations in slow, insidious ways based on the violence of humans. The status quo perpetuates the system that causes extreme violence. Rogero 2020. Systemic violence refers to harm people suffer from social structures and the institutions sustaining and reproducing it. This type of violence prevents its victims from satisfying their basic needs and is an unavoidable impairment of the fundamental needs necessary for human existence. Although it does not convey an image of direct physical aggression, systemic violence is the cause of suffering, disability, and premature death. Systemic violence, however, is found in the smooth functioning of economic political systems and can be turned objective, as it appears not to require specific deliberations by individuals exerting it. From a specific perspective, systemic violence manifests manifests itself in high rates of disability and death suffered by certain social groups, and the constraints imposed on them that limit their ability to change their condition. These are avoidable limitations that only describe a condition of injustice and oppression, but also contain a violent forces that are determined by human decisions rather than by nature. Observation 2 is inherency. This is important. The inherent barrier to promote change is principle, exercise, and narrative. Policy change is not a reform without a change of underlying principle. First, the immigration court system is neglected and weaponized. Southern poverty laws in 2019. The immigration system is fundamentally flawed. The Attorney General of the United States is required to craft a functioning immigration court system. Every Attorney General has failed to do so. The immigration court system that persists today is plagued by decades of neglect. The Attorney General has gone even further by seeming to actively weaponize the immigration court system. And immigration is subject to the whims of the executive, Levy 2019. The assault on immigration intersects with the crumbling and the separation of powers and the falling away constraints of the presidency. The crumbling separation of powers reinforce each other in immigration policy, respect to usurpation, think of the abuse of emergency power to fund the wall, the bad faith national security justifications. The executive treats provisions as just providing labels to attach to policymaking without or open defiance of Congress and circumstances are not yet about security. The disingenuous is barely disguised. Finally, even seemingly pro-immigrant policies result in violence against immigrant populations. Chambers, 2021. President Biden directed the Justice Department not to renew contracts with privately operated prisons, but Biden's order does not extend to detention centers that are under the jurisdiction of Homeland Security and primarily have undocumented immigrants. So observation 3 is the plan. This is important. I propose the United States federal government should implement immigration reform that removes substantial statutory restrictions on legal immigration in the United States because we are all brothers and sisters under God. I apologize. There should be an extra little caveat on there. Basically, we're just going to not restrict who can and cannot come into the United States. Just think of that as that's the ultimate statutory restriction we're removing with the USFG. I apologize. That's bad file management. Okay, so now we got to go. So first, I promote immigration activism, remove substantial statutory restrictions on legal immigration via global theology. Read from Pope Francis, papal encyclical, All Brothers, Francis 2020. In some migration causes fear and alarm. Migrants are not seen as entitled like others to participate in life of society and it's forgotten that they possess the same intrinsic dignity. For Christians, this way of thinking and acting is unacceptable since it sets certain political preferences above deconvictions of our faith, the inalienable dignity of each person, regardless of origin, race, or religion, supreme law, fraternal love. No one then can remain excluded because of his or her place of birth. The limits of borders and interstates cannot stand in the way. It is unacceptable the mere place of one's birth should result in his or her possessing pure opportunity for a developed life and dignified life. And framing, you should validate that solvency based on narrative activism through the lens of religious solidarity. Principle is the one and only inherent barrier to solving the harms of the status quo. We need to change the principles of integration away from market citizens to solve both individual and systemic level harms. Evaluate the affirmative solvency as an activist narrative to create immigration reform through motivating religious solidarity. Observation 4, solvency. Scenario 1 is that individual engagement is in protagonistic agency is key to liberation. McKellar in 2017. We commit ourselves to network among the working class, peasantry, and the urban, cognitary, and precarious in order to break down hierarchies of power, providing for each according to his or her needs, and simply because they exist and are God's children. God is the moral imperative itself, the imperative struggle and injustice and innocent suffering. A commitment to the oppressed leads to action in the world. Critical reflection on action leads to protagonistic agency, a practice of liberation. Protagonistic agency pulls reality of social change, bringing it into actuality. Scenario 2 is politics. Small groups of individuals result in large-scale change. Only a relatively small group of engaged activists are key to effect change. In 2019. In 1986, Filipinos took the streets of Manila in peaceful protest and prayer in the People Power movement. The Marcos regime folded on the fourth day. On 2019, the presidents of Sudan and Algeria both announced they would step aside after decades in office thanks to peaceful campaigns of resistance. In each case, civil resistance by ordinary members of the public trumped the political elite to achieve radical change. Numbers really matter for building power that can challenge and trust authorities. Once around 3.5% of the whole population began to participate actively, success appears to be inevitable. Scenario 3, institutions and governments reflection on the mindset and narrative of the people. 3 ways of changing our governments to establish underlying values about first changing their institutional changes to Diplomacy 2021. We cannot have good political institutions. Our visions are completely narrow. The road to good political and social institutions is by broadening our visions. Our political institutions cannot be considered as merely technical instruments. Politics needs empathy. Do not concentrate on merely reforming these institutions, especially by trying to make them into technical instruments. Thank you.
Cool. 3 minutes of flex.
Yep.
Starting time now. Just to clarify, you generate offense from speaking of the AC in terms of the narrative, right?
Yeah, that's our number one is our narrative solvency.
Okay. Yeah, cool. I just wanted to make sure. So one of your cards says that any sort of immigration action, including a negative action, is bad, but you also defend the resolution in some form of way. Which one is it? Is it all immigration actions are bad, or are some okay?
What card are you referring to? Can you just tell me?
Yeah, sure. So that's the it is the Chambers 21 card. Even seemingly pro-immigrant policies result in violence against immigration policies. Why is this just not a relink back into the affirmative?
Oh, well, because this is in the context of even though we elect people that we think will do good for immigrants, like President Biden, it doesn't actually matter because the inherency is not policy. It's instead the way that individuals treat people. And we need to
where in the card does it say any of that? Your card seems to indicate that Biden's just shitty because he's really bad with prisons, but it doesn't indicate reasons why sort of narrative construction means that any negative or positive action on immigration is bad.
Well, yeah, I don't have cards that say this card doesn't say exactly that, but instead it's part of a larger pool of evidence, which is why I read 4 cards from my inherency, because it's a complicated topic, right? Like, people don't often talk about this thing, but really, like, what actually matters is principle, and that's something we don't like to admit as policymakers, which is why we don't often spend a lot of time talking about it. But instead, I think that you evidence inside of a larger context. I think it's kind of stupid that we think that, oh, I have to read a card that says exactly what I want to say, rather instead of using cards to supplement as evidence.
I disagree, but okay, so when you read, like, when embracing sort of narratives, does everyone like embrace this like theological narrative?
Well, I mean, obviously the goal would be for everyone to embrace it, but I think like my solvency kind of shows like exactly the steps of who will be embracing it and like how they'll be embracing it. I think that like people embracing it is part of the solvency.
Okay, why should we tell brown folk in the global south who may not adopt Christianity that they should pray to God?
It's not that they should pray to God, so they should treat everybody as intrinsic dignity.
Yeah, through the lens of what? Christianity?
Yeah, through the lens of religious solidarity.
What's religious solidarity?
Religious solidarity is that believing that we are all intrinsically linked as humans through a religious authority. And sure, like that can be God, and I kind of understand your point, but the reason that we should do that is because it's the most effective narrative that we can give. Pure logic doesn't really work. We can't just say like, because clearly like in the status quo where we like believe that we can like somehow create morals out of thin air, it seems ineffective in actually doing anything because we defaulted to like the market citizenship narrative. I think that's wrong.
Okay. For sure. Starting a minute of prep starting time now. I'll take another 30 seconds actually. Cool. Uploading the doc. The order is 3 off, then the F in the order of the advocacy, then top down.
I still don't see it in the speech drop yet, so just waiting.
Okay, gotcha. That's my bad. Sorry, my computer's being hella slow right now, so I'm like trying to drop this. Yeah.
There we go. I see it now. Give me 1 second to get it open.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. I am good whenever you are, Max.
Cool. Sorry, you're gonna have to give me a second to have it load. I'm working on a Chromebook, so yeah, I relate to the slow computer problem.
Yeah, you're.
All right, there we go. We're good. Now we're good.
Yeah, I still gotta set up my stand anyway. You're so good. Cool. Whoa, my computer's just opened up the wrong doc. Let's see. Okay, there we go. All right. You all still hear me? Cool. Righteous. All right. Interpretation affirmative only drive office about hypothetical implementation topical via platex ready AC result based policy Louisiana House 05 resolution for policies and inquiry enacting clause resolution term resolve and the United States federal government means in 3 branches 0787 political organization structural government United States federal government federal republic city 50 states federal government is composed of 3 branches legislative branch and executive branch and judicial branch remove these eliminate Merriam-Webster 20 to get rid of eliminate the statutory restrictions are regulated by law vocabulary.com no date statutory is related to set by laws or statutes authorized by a statute immigration restriction means the government type of equality or terms of admission by the USFG posture 06 immigration policy law equality type or terms of admission we describe it in the immigration system violation 1 grammar you the definition apply you have to defend only a governmental action which you don't defend second is going to be die extra top county drive extra offense of the way in which you sort of have a sort of narrative reconstruction via the AC as individual politics standards one's going to be policy engagement our form of policy scenario analysis pedagogically valuable enhances grade suitable complexity constructs cognitive biases a lot of logical assumptions enables the imagination creation of alternative which means we solve all of your offense burn it's all 16 which is valuable policy making offense ideas and analysis can be versus to make future states going to be on a conflict these are the whole explorations of the current prepared to take advantage of expect opportunities to protect themselves and adverse external shocks the city serving the purpose of corporate planning yes and that's not inherently limited those rules explicitly not forecast projections based on literal exploration contemporary plan or instead hypothesis the expert predictions or should try to be equated with simulations that you make sure the possible future states of the world the decision makers is the constraint by the existing mental models of maps the limitations accepted by the cognitive biases that the confirmation bias these higher scenarios is an ability to individuals to break out of conventional modes to think and analysis by introducing unusual combination of trends deliberate and continue as a narrative by the future imagining alternative future or structural analysis process enables policy makers to envision and adapt to something altogether with the present similar strategies for avoiding failures of creativity too even if predictions are perfect the alternative political ignorance leads to worse political decision making and turns the affirmative which means that we lead a better version of the app later for instance in 06 where analysis is highly inadequate to personal beliefs and decision making field avoiding good ambiguity to great impact increased perceptions without careful analysis what the relative likely to relatively likely with it and the all biases strategic choice decision maker have no faith in predictions left with more let's have the worst case scenarios and existing beliefs that will confront the result of biases toward the current direction towards status quo 4 limits the affirmative understood because they read any affirmative relatives enough that the episode of leaked topic 5 is going to be ground your triple legit minus being true is like recent bad which makes it negating impossible 6 is going to be that in environment 6 you say to certain groups of harm turns but those arguments only dark accepted and references that we have equal times make arguments and perhaps 7 is going to be rules by not responsibility acceptance rules by acceptance speech times places debate 8 is going to be the topical version needs to remove all restrictions by open borders but not generate any sort of pre-fiat offense that solves all of your offense because it means that we don't have any sort of relationship with immigrants voters 1 party need rules for the game 6 to be sued first 20 affirmative excuse evaluation arguments say true or false based on the full both rounds of false good indicate who's better because it one arguments that should get educated crap that missing with the affirmative gets moved away makes no whether or not the affirmative is true he's going to be educated he's actually back active without it people support don't support away without it debate collapses which goes to keep solved too because it's no longer red fourth is going to be used to be interpretation of reasonability because reasonability is arbitrary leads to raise above next off we're not going to read the second off interpretation the affirmative must disclose the plan text but already made support around violation they didn't say one's going to be negative prep 6 minutes of prep is not enough to put together okay here one and see the updates generics 30 minutes is necessary to learn a little bit about the affirmative place together with the NC positions by applying cut research their applications to affirmative text is going to be affirmative colon plan text disclosures scourges cheap shot affirmative the affirmative is inherent or easily defeated 20 minutes of research the case should lose so I answered 1 AR claims about innovation there's 30 minutes about they're still instead of behind is strategic affirmative just well justified affirmative with no incentive to cut horrible and coherent affirmatives that the negative can't check against broader literature these going to be no small schools argument I'm literally a single debate from UCLA voters 1 I just cross applied the voters into the sheet go to the off go to the advocacy. The first argument is going to be, we'll read the card. Demands on this AR productive, etc. It's just a discussion, but does not attach to this government with the legitimacy ensures the affirmative size beyond the which means that even if T doesn't turn the affirmative scenario plan, doesn't check our biases, we are still the first step for ever actualizing the affirmative, which means the affirmative is the desired interpretation Newman 11. Remember the strategy to working outside the state today, it essentially leaves the state technically tell responsibility even if the self-indulgent policy demand the notion of demands on the state and draconian policing is one of the basic strategies of social movements and radical groups making such demands not necessarily media working within the state, reaffirming its legitimacy on the contrary demands are from the position of outside of established political order, it often exceed the question of implementation. And the second argument, this is where analysts are going to come in, Paul, just heads up. The second argument is going to be the colonialism this side. They literally said during cross-examination that all individuals should submit to sort of theological understanding of the world and a narrative of God and treating each other as equal through the narrative of Christian theology. That's literally the hardest link to a set called this that I've ever seen. You should vote them down a priori for the same logic that justified native dispossession from the Spaniard conquistadors that say that they should eliminate native folks within Venezuela because they don't adopt Christianity, because there were varying levels of difference from like practicing action, Christianity. Second argument is going to be that we say that Christianity always gets co-opted by pedophiles. Look to the way in which that you quote Pope Francis, particularly several individuals within the Catholic Church have been indicted for pedophilia, which leads to the decking quality of life for particularly children. Another independent reason why you reject the team. The third argument is going to be you probably relink here. Your only analysis here is that all negative action or all actions within immigration is bad, but you still rely on some form of an action to decrease immigration restrictions, which is cool. You relink back into your own criticism. That means you should evaluate relinks versus links because it's the logic of intentionality and difference between murder versus manslaughter. The fourth argument is going to be the homophobia dissad. The A argument is you have not sort of specified what part of Christian theology you endorse, which means we have to hold the AC accountable for defending all of Christian theology, which has historically been used to justify things like homophobia, even if that is not justified within the Bible. Specifically, historically, you can look to places like the Bible Belt in the South as reasons why it justified violent crimes against trans individuals and other gay individuals, which means that this probably independently means another IVI, which means that you reject them a priori. Go to observation 4. Go to top of case, actually. Go to observation 1. They say immigrants are sort of commodities. That's their Narvin 12 evidence. The first time is going to be this is probably inevitable because your card is specifically about the commodification of the caricature of the immigrant. But debate is always about commodifying. Look at the way in which literally every form of debate, including K debate, has some form of talking about the other that they try to solve for, which means that everyone is always upon it. It's just a question. Can we orient ourselves in a way that doesn't break rules and has equitable ground? That means the T is for prior question. They say immigrants are treated poorly. The one argument is going to be that it means that the TVA massively is able to solve for all this anyway. Independently, also cognitive biases being deconstructed through topical affirmatives and scenario planning also means we probably resolve all these anyway. Go to observation 4 of solvency. Grouped all these arguments together. The first arguments, these are all just solvency boosts for T in a world where we're not going for necessarily that the United States federal government is good writ large, but rather we're saying that demands on the state and the discussions that we sort of had via things like topical affirmatives that don't involve extra T offense are always going to be a way of checking back cognitive biases that are able to increase individual engagement in the first place. Otherwise, debate becomes a monologue. That turns all of your solvency points independently because narrative construction is about the narrative of the one individual, or it pins narratives together against each other, which means that either way, narratives is probably a really bad methodology to be able to resolve all their violence, which means even if they are winning at the affirmative comes first, they don't solve for and actually make it worse. I can give you a fresh doc, but I just didn't read T restrictions.
Sorry, I wasn't unmuted. Are you ready for cross-legs?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So, just going through, I don't really understand this midpoint, like where best your disclosure. Like your 2, even if predictions are perfect alternatives, political ignorance leads to worse political decision making and turns the app and means we lead to a better version of the app later. Can you like explain that card and like what that?
Yeah, the Fitzsimmons 06 card is saying that we should be able to have like sort of like scenario analysis, right? And these sort of like focus on things like narratives prevents us from being able to have like analysis about like whether or not the USFG will do X thing, right? We say that absent that allows for like the proliferation of sort of cognitive biases and understandings of flawed ontological assumptions by say like things like the brown body in the first place, which means that even if you win that your app is good, right? We say T is a necessary ethical prerequisite to be able to deconstruct those sort of biases so they don't proliferate, so we can have better versions of the affirmative in the future free of those sort of biases.
Okay. Awesome. Going through, what was the other thing that? Yeah. Oh yeah. Demands on the state are a productive center of discussion, but doesn't tie to the government or its legitimacy. Can you explain that as well?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. We say that you can make demands on the state with scenario analysis without like embodying what it means to be like Biden, for example, right? It is a question that we can never implement narratives, right? Or have a plan where every individual has a narrative, right? Or the ability to have a narrative without, you know, some form of like protection from say like, you know, folks making demands on the state, right? Like holding the state like accountable. Otherwise, if we just focus on narrative, the state now has room to just be like, haha, while y'all are focusing on narratives, we will just kind of do our own thing and enact violence.
Okay, and so like my solvency story where I kind of talk about how narratives can like help and fix a state, that's just not, you feel like that's just not relevant?
I just, one, think a lot of your cards are power tag, if I'm being perfectly honest. But 2, I also think we've already turned that via the standards level debate. And T, and 2, we're in dike of the way you have model debate for narratives, not that narratives writ large are bad.
Okay, okay. So most of this is just due to my modeling.
Yeah, your model for debate for narratives means that narratives never get to enact that sort of change. That's the whole analytical analysis coming out of the NC at the bottom of the case.
Okay, awesome. Okay, and then also you kind of talk about how like all Christian theology, and then Christian theology obviously has a bunch of negatives attached to it, and negative things that have been justified using Christian theology. But like in our case, isn't it good? Isn't the thing that we're doing good?
No, we say that you literally said during cross-ex that everyone ought to embrace this sort of theology, and that would be the end goal. We say that that's literally the hardest link to colonialism we've ever seen, which means even if it's a good methodology, the way it gets sort of implemented by the AC is always going to be problematic.
All right, awesome.
For sure.
Oh, that is time. Whoops, no, that. Oh, okay. Anyhow, so I'll take.
You can just run prep and let me know what you use.
I plan to take around 2 minutes, but it might be longer. You never know.
Cool.
I stopped time at 2:11 for me.
Sorry, 211 used or 211 remaining?
2:11 used. Then should be uploaded in a second. Sorry, I gotta manage speech drop a little bit. Oh, there, now it should be good. Wait, why is that not? Oh, I apologize. I accidentally turned it into a Word document and not a PDF.
You're so chum.
That explains why I couldn't select it. There we go. All right, there we go. That should be right there. Okay. And then the order is just going to be the off, and then we're going to go case, and then their analytics.
Sorry, one more time.
The off T, their case, then their analytics.
So what we call the same order.
Yeah, same order.
Yeah, cool.
So first, I'll reply to their first counter-interpretation, narrative activism, a topical strategy and form for cases to take. To say that USFG reform is not part of our case is simply lacking imagination while simultaneously ignoring our solvency. Sorry, extending inherency and solvency. Reform operates on multiple levels. The USFG isn't a monolithic actor. Policymaking within the government is relying on a large complex of actors. Local actors have larger impact on differential levels. Starting at 13. So far, it's been evident that change is a multi-actor, multi-dimensional process. You need to consider policy change process from a multi-level perspective involving a variety of actors. Policymaking has increasingly become complex, where actors move between different levels of action and authority is dispersed across multiple tiers, i.e. national, regional, or local. Policies of government can be a response to change. Top-down versus bottom-up approaches may be used for both parts of the process. Bottom-up processes for the involvement of the local level in policymaking and subsequent impact on higher levels. Standards. Easy analysis. Impacts are real and solvency can easily be tracked. In fact, our solvency is a higher burden than normal because I have to explain how it both motivates the individual and changes the institution. Also, offensive bill. Let's say, yeah, actually, you didn't read grants, so never mind. So anyway, CP grant. You also brought grant run a CP. What are alternative narratives? Better to go with the new philosophical approach. You have plenty of room for counter propositions specific to topic. My case can't be written any other topic. I can't use the post-encyclical or energy or international relations. Specific to immigration in this resolution. That's how limits are established in the education maintained because it requires real research. Members can choose approach. Variety is educational. It's merely a different focus because we realize that reality of inherent barriers to government, how changing laws ultimately doesn't do anything without first changing the principle and narrative for how we engage. Well, it's cool to debate your preferred way. Why can't we debate about this? It's the opposite of education. Of course, everyone's the same gutter in their approach. Having every debate be different creates the education. It's not educational to read the same prepared dissets and ads we stole from paperless debate. Most diverse ecosystems are the healthiest. So which side solves fairness? Affirmatives decide the specific focus to serve as an active proof of the resolution as per the NFALD rules. You do the same on app. Just because you have the same conception of the resolution when you run when it's your turn doesn't make an alternative concept unfair or unengageable. App and make have different responsibilities. Such sides resolve the fairness issues. Overly, creating limits on what can be talked about within debate immigration until we hit a narrow alley for the negative. Memorized responses made worse by time differential for presenting evidence. Fairness the app is found presenting unique art. Also, actually, you didn't read research, so we're actually going to cut that one as well. And also, LD is a stock issues format. The burden of app is stock issues. NFA rules current. The official decision-making paradigm of NFA-LD is that of stock issues harm, advantage, or goals, inherency, solvency, and topicality. The app is required to propose a plan that meets four initial burdens. Plans only need to be detailed enough to solve the harms identified. NFA rules current. App is required to propose a plan. App needs not be detailed, but should be sufficient to prove the plan's propensity to solve the problem area. It's also educational towards activism. Mitchell, 1995. These structural features enable a theory of fiat to steer debate participants toward an activist political trajectory. Translating the spectator orientation encouraged by the received view of external fiat. Advocates who defend course of action backed by reflexive fiat on council's make the commitment to directly engage the issue they identify as pressing public concerns, unlike the temporarily ephemeral political commitment dealt in defense of simulated plans. Fiat is a concrete course of action is bound by the limits of pragmatism and utopian schedules can be challenged effectively on such grounds. And then, like, basically, your voters for this judge are just going to be fairness and education. Honestly, that's more important than any of. Honestly, education is probably going to be the most important voter here. The reason it outweighs like any of the weird offensive reading about like, oh, fine, my better common ground, because ultimately none of this is actually going to become part of the USFG, right? We're not reading this in front of Congress, and so really, you should value the education debate of this route and how that further inspires us to then go and move on. That you should value that way more than any type of like esoteric high-level government thoughts. Okay, next. Next counter-interpret, I'm going to actually just do analytics for these standards because I don't have them prepped, but you know, you'll see. Thanks. Counter-interpretation. Disclosure is cool, but shouldn't be required. So competitive equity. First judge is that like, okay, I'm part of a small school, UCLA. I don't. You seem to be part of a smaller program too. Doesn't it kind of suck that when you put your case out there, basically people just prep like mountains of prep, just like with their entire program, and then basically they have pre-prepared responses to everything you read. Isn't it kind of suck that debate has just become a speed reading competition where we just steal prep from different camps and different schools and different tournaments? Like, doesn't it kind of suck that all of that is happening? And like, and doesn't this kind of just edge out the smaller, more creative, first edge out smaller, more creative cases, and also just edge out smaller schools, smaller programs, people with less people to do less prep? Doesn't that kind of suck that you're like just edged out and given at a competitive disadvantage just because that you come from a smaller program and not a camp that can pump out tons of it? Also, this wastes debate time. Honestly, I've already wasted like a minute of my life talking about this. And honestly, it's the last tournament. Who cares? Like, Judge, honestly, like, okay, cool, you can drop me from the debate round. I don't think that's a very satisfying conclusion to debate. I don't think that's very awesome. This is the like last tournament of the year, right? For most of us. You might have like one more tournament, but honestly, at this point, like, who cares? We've done like 3 tournament. Our school's done like 3 NFALD tournaments this entire year. Like, let's not just waste this time. Anyway, also this ruins experience for the debater. If you just drop him because of like, if you just drop me because of this, really what you just do is you just ruin the experience, right? Like, I think it's cool that we're like gaining experience. This tournament doesn't actually mean anything. It's not like it has any actual qualifications for anything. So I would just like, it ruins the experience. It ruins like any type of experience or educational gain. Again, education is the thing that you're going to be wanting. And also, like, I would just actually voted this off of. It's not on the list, but I would just vote this off of just like kind of the collapse of debate, or really just the collapse of like casual and fun debate, which is exactly what like this tournament that this small is about. Anyway, so now on to case. So religion is required for framework. Practice must have framework to be successful for a long-term process. Also, in 2019, a social justice campaign was rarely a single event or a single march. Organization begin and fizzle, but activists continue. Having a framework for the intricacies of social changes needed for long-term processes to be successful. They also need to remind themselves the higher goals they're trying to achieve. A long-term commitment is often the best ally a change agent has, along with allies from the community, and bring about real change against the status quo. Religion gives that framework through language and tools for restorative justice efforts. Passed in 2020, restorative justice provides the language and tools to help repair those harms. Look at the civil rights movement, the blueprint for the modern movement. It took 400 years to get where we are today, but if you think that one afternoon is going to take care of it, it's going to reasonable expectation. It's holy work. It's a chance to live out the integrity of it. There's something liberating saying, I want to live out my values in a truly integrative way. And so that's ultimately what we're using, is we're using religion because it's actually going to succeed. Because yeah, it's cool to basically say like, oh, that's colonialism, oh, that's terrible. But the truth is that they accept all of our harms. Their only response on the harm sheet is that commodification happens in debates. I don't really care about debate, Judge. I care about the real world. And what we're reading is real stuff that's happening. How they're ignored by the individuals who act in ICE, even though policy says otherwise. How they're commodified by different benefits, even though, again, policy says otherwise. Judge, this is exactly the problem. And basically our solvency story is that we need religion to be successful in the first place. And the idea that's like, oh, colonialism leads that there's going to be no hope for any type of change in the future. And that's ultimately why we should just skip all of their analysis of like dropping us immediately, instead actually engage in the solvency. Thank you.
For sure. Taking 2 minutes, 30 seconds of prep. Starting time now. Okay, cool. The order is going to be an overview, then disclosure, T, the F in the order of inherency, then solvency. And this speech is 6 minutes, right? Yeah. All right, cool. And so again, starting with a brief overview. Actually, I would follow the overview, Paul. I would. It's functionally layers and proofs.
Okay.
Yeah. Overview, 2 places you can be voting negative with a couple of implications. 1, you've conceded that you're extra topical via the narrative construction of your representations. 2 implications. A, that means that if you've conceded fairness skews evaluation, it means you presume all the affirmative claims false because they're untestable, which means that also Thanos snaps the entirety of the 1AR. B, that you have also conceded it turns the affirmative because it leads to debate collapse. If narratives are good, then we should preserve the space to be able to have narratives in the first place. 2, you have conceded the disads on the affirmative. You just say I don't engage with insolvency, but yet you have conceded the internal link analysis to how your specific employment of the app is bad, which means that there were 2 implications. A, you vote them down a priori as an independent voting issue, or B, it turns the entirety of the affirmative anyway, which means they can't weigh the affirmative. Cool, let's go to the interpretation. Extend across the interpretation. And I want you to also extend across the second violation. That's the extra T violation that they generate offense from the representations of the AC by the speaking of it. That's really unpredictable. Do you know how many narratives there are that we couldn't have predicted? It does not matter if you are tangibly related to the topic. That's the limits analysis we give. Let's go down there in a minute, but I want you to go to the standards and extend across both the first and second standard, specifically as policy scenario analysis is able to give us the tools to be able to deconstruct cognitive biases that allow us to see us as equals, as brothers and sisters, like your affirmative says, which means we solve for the affirmative better, which means it's not a disadd to our interpretation. But independently, extend across the third and fourth argument. That's the limits and ground argument. You have conceded that there are too many narratives to be able to predict your affirmative, specifically in a world where there are already 178 visa categories on top of having to predict the narratives. That means that there's an impossible neg burden for the negative, which means that that means that all of our ground is lost, which means that it makes it impossible to negate because your interpretation justifies narratives that just say racism is bad, which makes negating impossible. That turns the debate into a monologue, which means that which means coalition building becomes impossible, which is a terminal solvency deficit to the affirmative anyway, which you have conceded. Extend across the seventh argument. That's the TVA solves all of your offense. If you affirm the resolution without pre-fiat offense with no borders, that solves 100% of your offense because it means we can have the chance to embrace folks as equals without having the authority of saying who is illegal and who is not. Go to the counter interpretation. 1, interflaw. Your interp doesn't tell you how you should be affirming the resolution, which means you wouldn't be able to resolve either of our offenses. It just says that narratives are good, which means that you can't evaluate this as resolving any sort of standards or counter standards. Go to the Sarah 13 evidence. Cool. The one argument is going to be that you have conceded too many reasons why we said that we're not the state. Your arguments are about whether or not the United States federal government is bad, not whether or not agents can make demands on the state, which means this is probably either A, power tech, or B, not responsive. Go to the next 2 arguments. They say offense for the affirmative and solvency easy, something like that. The first argument is going to be no. You've conceded that you're not predictable, which means that even if we have easy arguments that we could be making, we don't know that we have access to those arguments in the first place. Second, they might try to go for the fact that we have a bunch of new arguments that we have access to, but no, that is not true. There's a difference in quality and quantity. Sure, maybe I can have like 80 reasons why racism is maybe good when you read racism bad, but that means I'm forced to defend a pretty bad position, which means that you should evaluate quality of ground versus quantity of ground, because that's the only way we can ensure actual clash that ensures the policy scenario analysis that deconstructs cognitive biases. They say CPs, but the one's going to be no. That just means we can justify cheater counter plans that moot the entirety of the AC offense, which means that this probably doesn't resolve any part of our offense. Go to topic specific argument. The one's going to be no, just crossed by the analysis I did earlier. They say the affirmative may choose an approach. The one's going to be no. That is not true. That means that you justify affirmatives rejecting the resolution, which makes limits even worse. They say switch side solves. Cool. The one argument is going to be that you have probably thumped all of your own offense. Switch side debate solves all of your offense. You read an extra standard for us. Cool. That means that you could have read this on a negative and resolve all of your offense without biting the limits arguments. They say that we overlimit them. The one arm is going to be no. You have conceded that there are over 187 visa categories, which means you still have access to limits. They're just predictable limits, which means that you still have access to your flexibility without skewing the negative out of the round. They say the rules, but the one arm is going to be that where in the rules does it say you're allowed to derive offense from representations be extra topical? They look through their evidence, Paul. None of their evidence says that. Just because they say stock issues, like, look, I can run set call and just say I have a bunch of observations, 1, inherency, harms, and advocacy, but that doesn't mean that I'm not like rejecting the resolution. This doesn't make any sense. Go to the voters. Extend across is an a priori issue. You evaluate this before anything else, which means that you look here before you look to the criticism. Or on top of that, you can extend across second argument that fairness skews evaluation. That means that you presume all their claims false. 2 implications. 1, you reject all the 1AR answers on the interpretation proper. But 2, you have also independently means that you presume all the AC claims of the plan false, which means you vote negative on presumption because the game means deny truth up. They say education comes first. The one is going to be no. Fairness is the internal link to education in the first place. For example, if I get suddenly plucked into into a Calculus 5 class while barely passing Algebra 2, I never gleaned the benefits of the education in the first place because I was never able to engage. Second, could be that education is not verifiable. How do we know if I've learned something? We don't know, which means fairness is the only offense we can truly evaluate. 3, we also say that fairness, yeah, that's fine. Go to disclosure. Extend across the counter interpretation. We're going to go for it. The first argument is going to be, they might try to go for the collapse debate or some argument like that, but there's no RVIs because that de-incentivizes theory and makes the negative afraid to call out a beast, which allows proliferation of infinite affirmatives, which massively outweighs any time skew arguments. Go to the affirmative proper. Group their two extensions together. The first time is going to be that in the world of your re-explanation hard bites at this head, you easily vote on the IVIs that we put on case. But second is going to be that your own your own arguments say that we never become the USFG and we aren't making demands on the USFG. We're not in front of Congress. Cool. That means that your spill up narrative is about the quote real world never come to fruition. You've thumped all of your own offense. Go to the advocacy. Extend across all 3 of the disads. You have conceded that they all lead to the decrease of quality of life and actively turn the affirmative. 3 independent reasons why they can't go for the affirmative even if it comes first.
I'll take my 150 or 148 of prep time, or I have left. I got like 140. And we got 3 minutes. So the order is just going to be overview, their independent issues on case, and then theory. And typically the policy theory. So first, to start off this debate, well, here's what, Judge, honestly, after hearing all the negative arguments, basically what they want you to vote on is that for against our case is that our narrative act doesn't work. But Judge, the reality is we've read far too many cards. We've read far too many cards on the solvency. We've read far too many cards on the inherency. The only really offense they've been given is like, oh, our 1 Chambers 21 card doesn't really work. But Judge, it's like, but Judge, ultimately, like that, ultimately, even if you can see like, okay, that 1 card doesn't work, it doesn't really matter because we've showed that there's legit harms, there's legit inherency that keeps these harms that in the form of principle, and that principle is works. And that's the thing, is that our entire solvency is basically how our activism actually creates consequences, and how our narrative actually will be able to seep into people. That's our entire solvency story. And the fact that they've completely ignored this, basically called that our solvency won't work, is completely false. Lastly, their only other harm that they basically given is that like, is that they like try to like turn this into like, we're just making quality of life worse. When Judge, basically quality of life is already fucking terrible because everyone treats immigrants as fucking commodities, and that needs to be solved. So basically, try or die on the app. That's that. And then basically, so the only reason that you would literally vote on neg is because of theory. You basically think that narrative solvency doesn't belong as part of this debate. But here's the thing, Judge, is that they completely misunderstand by basically saying that like, oh, wait, you know, I could just run racism bad under my interpretation. But Judge, I think they completely misunderstand this point, is that because the whole point of our narrative solvency is that you have to prove that the narrative actually works, that the narrative will actually succeed in society. And that is the huge burden that we have placed upon ourselves. That is, we mentioned this on the easy analysis standard, is that basically their entire point is like, oh, you can just pick any narrative you want. No, we can only pick narratives that work. And honestly, that is far more educational. And also that means that we also engage in their policy making scenario. We also engage in like, oh, what will happen if we do this thing? Because we are actually doing a thing. We are evaluating the solvency of that thing. That's what most of their offense on their cards are predicated on. And so basically, Judge, what you're finding here is that at best it's just a weird sweep where basically we're just talking past each other because they completely just misinterpret our case. They think they can just run racism bad under interpretation. That's not false. Because obviously then the NAG would just stand up and say like, oh, well, racism bad has been like run from activists since like the beginning of time, but obviously it hasn't worked out. That's the whole point, is that the only type of actual successful activism we've seen is religious, and that is exactly what our Patterson 2020 card is all about. Is that's the only way we get to restorative justice. So that's the limit there, is that you can easily actually create offense. You can actually create also really good defense, and that's what you should actually be evaluating. So just ultimately, the only way you vote for nay is basically on this like idea that you can just dismiss the narrative activism. But we've given interpretations within the rules that show like, hey, there's a solid aft burden. There's actually a way to debate this, and that we actually do engage in policy making, which actually allows for far greater education. And that's all we've got. So please vote off of education. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Give me a few minutes, gang, and I'll get some stuff typed up and get you a decision.
Cool. Thank you. Good round.
You too. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Is everyone all set? Looks like you're both here, obviously. We're good?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So I end up voting negative in this debate. I think the neg is winning some pretty massive concessions on the long form framework shell. The most important drop on this issue in my mind is the skews evaluation analysis on the voter level. In a world where the affirmative sort of concedes that allowing affirmatives that violate the neg's interp would skew evaluation of debate, and that is essentially the reason why I can't allow you to leverage the 1AC arguments against theory, I think 99% of the 1AR and 2AR responses sort of disappear. I think that the negative also had a pretty good out on disclosure had they wanted to. In many respects, I think this being the last tournament of the year actually makes reading a non-topical, non-disclosed AF even worse, because ostensibly the AF would have had all year to prep their responses, and the neg is just like, oh, well, here's this new thing that I've never seen or is not within the balance topic, but obviously no one goes for that, so it's relevant. And lastly, I think that the negative needs to have some analysis about how the AF's counterinterp essentially would force a judge to evaluate AF's solvency in order to determine if they are topical or not, and how that sort of blurs the burdens of solvency and topicality, and then would once again really fuel your standard, which sort of says, can I weigh the AF or not, right? Because if I have to evaluate AF solvency in the first place, and that assumes a world where I think the AF is legitimate and kind of becomes circular on the question of topicality, I think that had there been some more substantive answers with regards to theory, like you can probably get around that. But then in that world, I think the neg probably goes for case, and there are concessions there too. I think the largest problem, though, which it isn't necessarily a problem, right? Because it's kind of a decision. But when you approach theory, you're kind of approaching it in this perspective of like, hey, let the kids play, so to speak, or whatever, that kind of thing. And I think that's fine. But against a team or an individual, and not that you know about Will, but like Berkeley/UCLA goes for theory like it's their job and like this is their world. I just think that they're kind of ready for that debate and have a lot of preempts throughout the shell that sort of like prevent that kind of analysis. And I think that the big issue there sort of comes from like the TBA question, because it gets really weird in a world where like the plan text, I write down the plain text you tell me to, but obviously that's not even the plain text in the doc, which then gets this whole weird thing happening about like narrative or not. And so, yeah, ultimately I end up voting on the first theory shell read by the negative. Thought it was a relatively fun debate. Does anyone have any questions about specific stuff I didn't cover or stuff I did cover?
Did you think, I know you said disclosure was go forable, and I was half tempted to go for disclosure, but do you think T was the right call writ large, or should I have just gone for disclosure period?
I think T was fine. I think T, in some respects, is better because then they don't get to leverage the AF as like a good idea and all that stuff. And I think the AF's best out in almost every debate is always the AF is a good idea, Yeah. But I think that in this particular instance, just like some of the answers on disclosure were particularly shallow. And honestly, in some respects, I thought it was actually fun that the most interesting counter standard that I was like, kind of a point there on disclosure was like, hey, debate's more fun if we don't disclose. And I was like, not a bad point. Not a bad point. You know what I mean? Like, because then I think that would potentially have allowed the affirmative to be like, this is independent of education and fairness, right? Like fun is a voting issue in some respects. That doesn't happen, obviously, a whole weird debate. But yeah, I think probably you should have gone for long form. I think there's a lot of concessions there. And I think that also you're certainly more familiar with collapsing to those sort of similar arguments because, again, y'all been reading that for a long time. You're very familiar with it. And you, in many respects, are going to have an analytical advantage because you've done Parley for years at a relatively or very high even level. And so I think debaters debating in their wheelhouse is a good idea. So if you're more comfortable with long form framework and there's drops on long form framework, you just, path of least resistance kind of stuff.
That makes sense.
All right. I will talk to y'all later. It's very nice to meet you, Max, and good luck going forward, gang. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for judging.